Alors, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Je suis en train de perdre mon voix, alors je vais essayer de garder mes commentaires un peu sur du côté court. When Dan Hebert asked me to start out today's session, he wanted me to talk a bit about why this topic is of interest to public safety. I'll do a little bit of that, but part of what I wanted to do was to sort of carry the flag from something Dan said yesterday about what it means to have had 15 years of Metropolis for $1 per Canadian citizen. And I'm going to connect that idea to a bit of, why public safety has been so interested in engaging with Metropolis and has benefited from it so much, I would say. Alors, premièrement, ça me fait énormément de plaisir d'être ici, puisque ça fait environ 4 années depuis le moment quand mon équipe a décidé d'avancer l'idée d'engager avec Metropolis comme priorité pour notre unité de recherche. Puis d'avancer l'idée que sécurité publique devait prendre un rôle majeur dans l'initiative, à côté des fondateurs comme Citoyenneté et Immigration Canada, comme Patrimoine Canada, comme Ressources humaines et Développement des compétences Canada. Puis ça fait environ 4 années que des collègues à travers de notre ministère, de la ministère de Justice et des autres organismes comme la Gendarmerie royale du Canada se sont joints à nous en décidant de travailler avec Metropolis, d'engager avec les 5 centres de recherche, d'engager avec un réseau qui a été déjà bien établi, étendait les années et des années d'efforts des divers chercheurs, des fonctionnaires, des membres des ONG et des communautés. In the 4 years of working with Metropolis, we've had so many opportunities to engage on complex, difficult topics, and to do so in a broader context of social policy, of immigration policy, of citizenship policy, of ideas of nation building, as one speaker put it yesterday. Some of the topics have included just the practice of conducting sensitive research, the movement of organized criminal groups into, through, and out of communities. 2 days ago, we had an all-day pre-conference on the multiple dimensions of community resilience. And in all these cases, it's that broader context that I want to underscore. First, a little bit about who we are. Sometimes people still, when they hear the phrase public safety, they think bicycle helmets. That's not quite what we do. We were created in 2003 to ensure better coordination across all federal departments and agencies responsible for the safety of Canadians. This includes leading Canada's response to natural disasters and addressing crime and safety issues that cover the spectrum of crime prevention, policing, corrections, parole, to national security, border policy, and enforcement. Our mandate, to put it briefly, is to keep Canadians safe and to work with others towards building a safe and resilient Canada. And that's the work with others element, again, that I want to underscore. The kind of work we do is not just about coordinating better with those whose mandates and responsibilities fall under the sort of direct mandate of public safety, but it's to go beyond. It's about being able to better connect with other policy and program areas. Sometimes this is just to learn. Sometimes this is to collaborate. Sometimes this is to aim to do a better job at complementing, finding ways that we can do what we do and avoid unintended consequences with those working in so many other areas. There's a suggestive example that I was able to attend yesterday. It was a workshop organized by Constance McIntosh from the Atlantic Metropolis Center. Some of the speakers included a member from the RCMP, but also from the BC government, and how they're working in collaboration to address trafficking in persons, both by investigating and aiming to arrest those trafficking and exploiting individuals for forced labor or for sexual exploitation, and also by providing wraparound holistic services for victims, including health, including counseling, including education, including training, housing, and so on. But at the same time, the workshop also covered sort of more macro policy issues, how we manage our refugee, our asylum, our migration institutions more generally, how those affect broad patterns of movement, but also can ultimately help or hurt when it comes to those sort of more individual cases of criminality and victimization. At the workshop, we noted the near unique way among comparable countries in which Canadians embrace immigration and diversity as a good thing. And yet we also talked about the far different sentiments expressed in public opinion polls that were done right around the time of the arrivals of 2 migrant vessels not far from here. Some find this seemingly contradictory reaction surprising. Others do not. But surely it's something we need to know more about. And the point again being doing it in a more integrated way. I thought the presentation yesterday by Robert McClayman shows a suggestive example about both the combination of being faced with extreme views but then coming at it with an integrated approach. He noted that the worst case scenarios are often presented publicly by authors about the coming crisis of climate change driven migration. His response was careful consideration of how climate driven migration tends to work from a wide array of perspectives, social, economic, physical, demographic, and notably he called for an interdisciplinary approach to better understanding and to arguing about what is needed to support better policy and programs in this context. And that brings me back to Dan's $1 and what we get out of it. And what Metropolis has enabled in terms of the engagement of my colleagues. It's brought this kind of integrated perspective. Often we hear the word securitization when folk like myself engage on these sorts of issues. And that was a word prominently on display yesterday in another workshop organized by a professor I first met while he was with the Prairie Metropolis Center and is now with the BC1. This is Paul Bramadat. It was a workshop on looking at the role of religion in radicalization leading to violence, but also how state and society sort of securitizes that concept. But what I'm pushing here is a different word, and that's horizontality. And the point is that there are very few important policy challenges now that aren't horizontal, that aren't complex, and that don't require the cooperation of people with many different mandates, with many different levels of government, with many different service providers and non-governmental organizations. To bring it back to the conference, the theme this year is much about how Canada is woven into the global system through immigration. We've looked at issues like demographics, economics, and climate, for example, but that global system is also about connections to ideas, to places, and conflict. This is nothing new, but we ask such questions because changing trends and new events like the arrival of the 2 migrant vessels prompt new questions and concerns from media, from different sectors of society, from scholars, non-governmental organizations, and yes, from government as well. It's at times like these that officials who are responsible for relevant policies and programs seek guidance and clarity from initiatives like Metropolis and turn to groups like mine who engage with the research community. A quick example relevant to today's topic, and then I'll turn it to our speakers. A few years ago, the Dutch Intelligence Service released a public report noting signs of what they called a parallel society forming. They saw evidence of certain members of the Muslim community in the Netherlands calling for disengagement with social and political institutions in the Netherlands, calling for people stopping to vote, stopping to engage with broader labor market institutions and society more generally. Separate from any concerns about violence, this was portrayed in that report as a threat to democracy and social cohesion. Notably, the same agency is now, in their more recent reports, sort of to echo something that Paul Spoonley said earlier today, I believe their number one threat that they talk about now is right-wing extremism. It's the anti-immigrant sentiment that Paul had us thinking about this morning. While it was a Dutch report, questions quickly began to follow in countries like the UK, the US, and Canada as well. Were there similar signs? If so, was there reason to worry? We're fortunate in this context to be able to turn, and I'm going to simplify the story a little bit to keep it shorter. We're fortunate to be able to turn to people like Dan Hebert. His work on enclaves in Canada was particularly relevant in this context because when people started looking at this Dutch intelligence report, there was this very quick sort of spike in interest in the concept of enclaves and do we have them in Canada? And yes, and what does that mean? Well, fortunately, we could turn to Dan. I remember even setting up a lunch conversation at the Copenhagen Metropolis conference between a colleague who works in security and Dan to talk more about this. Dan provided important clarity and context to people who I worked with who were searching for clarity and for answers. So, and I want to bring that now to our topic today. In keeping with that sort of broader context, your eyes may be drawn to the word conflict in the title, but I don't want you to lose sight of the rest of the topic. I believe all of our speakers are going to touch on issues of conflict, but I think all of them, if I'm correct, are much stronger on other parts of the stories which they're going to tell. So we have with us today, I'd say, a group of speakers, not to put too much pressure, capture the kind of connection, the kind of horizontality, the kind of perspective that has been so importantly provided to us by that $1. All the more reason you should join us this afternoon at the round table where we'll have a chance to go into even further depth with the speakers. We have, forgotten the I'm going to keep the bios quick because you have them in your package. But we're going to start with David Carment, who's Professor of International Affairs from Norman Patterson School of International Affairs at Carleton. He's going to do, hopefully, a nice bridge from our last panel because he's going to bring more of a global context perspective. Then we will have John Monahan, who's Executive Director at the Mosaic Institute in Toronto. We'll keep that global context, but start to look a little bit more at work at the Canadian level. And then Stephen Wine, Professor of Psychiatry and Director of the International Center on Responses to Catastrophes at the University of Illinois, and Rima Barnes-McGowan, who teaches Diaspora Studies with the Center for Diaspora and Transnational Studies and the Department of Historical Studies at the University of Toronto. Both of them will bring us closer to the community level, how this global context is playing out within some specific communities. Thank you.